typical Lakeland weather. Good for the soul, good for the spirit. Absolutely chucking it down. Way back in the late 60s, this was a major event for the Matheson climbing family, because normally we go along this path to Scout Crag and do all the diffs and V-diffs, but eventually we got good enough to venture straight up this hillside here to White Gill, and that was a major stepping stone in climbing standards, to be able to actually do routes like Slipknot and White Gill slabs. Memories flood back. For those of you who come up to White Gill, you know one of the best places to stop is under the tree at the bottom of Laugh Knot. Of course, it's just started raining. Over the years of sitting here, talking to my mother to try and get us psyched up to do Slipknot. She'd always wanted to do Slipknot, and I'm looking up at it now. A great climb of the grade. I think it's, well, it's certainly severe, and it was one of our first severes that we did together. And then we looked up longingly at Laugh Knot, which was only for the tigers of the day, way beyond our standard. And Do Not, that had a real reputation. And then further up the gill was White Gill Chimney and the slabs, and a route called the Gordian Knot, and then one called Haste Knot, which was just something else. Really, it was graded very severe, but it had a reputation of being very, you had to be very, very brave to do it, because you had to slide down this groove with only a little foothold at the bottom to stop you plunging into the overhanging abyss. And we used to sit here for hours talking about these routes and hoping to do them one day. Back in the 60s, we just used to climb as a family unit. There was just three of us. There was my dad and my mum and me. And we used to go everywhere as a team. Occasionally we'd meet other climbers, but we never really formed any climbing friendships with any other groups. We just kept to ourselves, not really knowing what was going on in the rest of the climbing world. And up until the age of 16, when I started to go out with a few mates from school, I wasn't really aware of anybody else's standards. Occasionally we saw some of the real hotshot climbers of the day climbing, people like Alan Austin and Ian Roper, but we never talked to them, never dared talk to them. But once I dared talk to Ray McAfee at Shepherd's Crag in Borrowdale, and when I was very young he took me up some routes, and I'll always remember that. And he climbed in a pair of brown rock boots called RDs, René des Maisons. So I always wanted some RDs, and eventually I got some for Christmas, and I climbed in those for years. When we'd pushed our standards up to probably very severe, I think I'd done virtually all of the diffs, the V diffs, the severes, the very severes, the hard very severes, virtually in the whole of the Lake District, and probably North Wales as well, because we used to go down there on holiday. And then I went away to university, and obviously things changed then, because I went to Sheffield University and sampled the delights of gritstone and limestone, which was a rude awakening. I mean, to jam up those cracks was just horrendous. I mean, it was something we just never did here in the lakes. And obviously my horizons changed as I got older, and I'd done most of the things that I could climb, and in fact I'd done most of the hardest routes in the lakes. And then one day I came up to Whitegill, actually to take my mother up the Gordian Knot, because she wanted to do that. And we got to the bottom of the climb, and I looked up and I saw this massive overhanging groove, and I thought, wow, wonder what that is. I came round to this side of the gully. Looks a fantastic line, but after I abseiled down it, it terrified me. It's so steep, just sweeps away underneath you when you abseil down the groove. And there seemed to be quite a lot of dubious rock in the back. I cleared a little bit out first time I abseiled down. But you know, sometimes in climbing things get into your head, and I went home that night and all I could think about was climbing this groove, because I was convinced nobody else had climbed it. And because I'd done everything else on the crag, I felt I had the right to do it. That, okay, I wasn't a famous climber or anything like that. I wasn't an Alan Austin. Hence I came back, I think it was the beginning of September 1970, with a friend of mine who actually doesn't climb, quite an athletic lad, so he didn't mind walking up to the crag. And I belayed him at the bottom, set off up the route, hanging on aid and all sorts, cleaning it. And I felt all right about it, because it was the only way it could be cleaned, and there was quite a lot of loose rock on it. And in fact, I threw off a block that was right in at the back. And when that exploded on the scree, my mate Pete, he'd had enough, he wanted to go, so I came down. But then I became really neurotic that Alan Austin would see all this stuff in this line, and persuaded me dad to come back with me, and he belayed me, and I managed to get up to the peg without using any aid, and eventually made the moves out to the edge of the overhang. And I tried to go straight over the crack of the overhang and fell off, and eventually I clawed my way up to the top of the crag. I was that excited at having done it, and it was like the first breakthrough into the world of new routing that I thought was really important. I wrote it up, and then I faced the fury of the Felon Rock, and that's another story. So that was 50 years ago, the first ascent of Paladin, but with aid. And that really preyed on my mind, and I was convinced that I could free climb it, and I didn't want anybody else to free climb it, because I saw it as my route. It was my baby. There was a real possessiveness about it, and I'd put all the effort into it, and I wanted it. So the following March in 1971, I went back with my dad again, and I managed to free climb it completely, and I was really made up, and I thought it was probably one of the harder routes in Langdale at the time. And looking back, it was probably one of the first E3s in the Lake District, apart from perhaps the Vikings on Toffet Wall. So here we are, 50 years later, staring up at Paladin. I'm feeling pretty nervous actually, because I want to make a good job of it, and I haven't actually climbed the route for quite a number of years, so I'm not very familiar with everything. But I certainly remember this steep overhanging wall at the start, and I consider it probably to be one of the three cruxes. So the first aim is to get a runner in to stop me hitting the lower angle stuff below if I happen to fall off. I've never been in my comfort zone on overhanging rock. I always rely on my feet. So as a personal strategy, what I do is I look ahead of me to see where the next decent footholds are. And once I can get my feet on those, I consider that to be the end of a climbing zone, and I can then concentrate on either looking for a runner or getting my strength back ready for the next zone. So that one's in, and from what I remember there's quite a few hard pulls here because the holes seem to be at the wrong angle. Long reach. I found a better side hold there, but I'm still not in a comfortable position to end that particular zone, so if I bridge up, there we go, I can start looking for a new runner to make myself feel at home. And once that one's in, I can start surveying the rest. So I know there's a good spike about 10 feet above me, which will be the end of the next zone, but there's a bit of a stiff pull here. And across to some better holds. And up to that good spike. Yes, thank you very much. This was obviously there years ago, but just above where my hands are was the large block that I threw off. Just pulling up into the bottom of the overhang, and that's where I'd put in a peg after the block came out. In fact, the remains of it are still there. Feels a bit awkward standing here, but there's an opportunity of another runner up to the left, which I'll try and get in before making those hard moves out rightwards. Quite intimidating looking out to the right. There we go, getting a semi-decent runner in. I actually backed this up with another runner beside it because I didn't think that was good enough. But again, getting the extensions on so the rope runs smoothly. There's nothing worse than not having enough runners to extend. So here we go, looking at, I think this is, well, I'm sure this is the second crux. Just run out of footholds completely, although the handholds, as you can see, are pretty good. Apart from that painful one I've got with my right hand. It cuts, well, it cuts into my fingers. Good hold there, yeah. But I've got my fingers stuck here. Come out and then I cut it. Hold's obviously very positive, as you can see, but very steep and unrelenting. Rarely does everything go really smoothly when you're placing a runner. You often have to fiddle around seemingly forever. Main thing's not to get frustrated, because you know it's going to happen. And eventually we're there, or nearly there. There we go. This is where I made the mistake on the first ascent. I tried to climb that crack up on the left hand side, you can just see, and I had a peg in there, and instead of staying in the groove I swung out to the left and tried to climb that crack and fell off because I had nothing for my feet. Should have stayed in the groove, as I'm going to in a minute. Once I get this runner fiddled in, which is a bit awkward to place. You know, one of those runners that won't quite go in, like that. Try and fiddle it in the other way around. There we go. What a great runner. Bit loose, but I don't think that'll come out. Well, hopefully not anyway. So you can see that crack up on the left hand side. Keep away from that, whatever you do. Obviously a view from below. So pulling up into the groove. Get your hip in. Saves the weight on your arms. Starting to feel a little bit anxious because I didn't want to blow it here, and I knew that this was quite a hard move. A lot of people do get it wrong here by going out to the left too early. So I'm going to change my hands around and keep layback in. Loose runner. Keep my hips in. And then lay back up, tiny crimp there with my right hand. There you are, nice comfortable position with a good finishing jog. And the difficulty is now over. And here we are 50 years previously in the same position, but after I'd used that point of aid. With some people on haste not having a good look. Right, I'm sort of a good resting place here.
Well done.
Oh, I'm pleased with that. Well then, I must have been weak 50 years ago. Mind you, I didn't do half as much training as I do now. Oh, what a great view. It's so long since I've done it, that was totally on site. It's strenuous, but it's well protected. Great stuff. I might have a pint tonight. Is a pint allowed?